The year is 249. On paper, the Roman Empire is still enormous. From Britain to the Euphrates, from the Rhine to North Africa, one state, one emperor, one law. In reality, the system is cracking. In the north, Gothic warbands push through the frontiers, testing the limits of Roman defenses. In the east, the Sasanian Persians are no longer a nuisance but a serious rival. Cities that once felt untouchable now hear news of lost battles and burned towns. Inside the walls, it is no better. A new wave of plague sweeps through the streets. Food is harder to find. Bread, the simplest Roman comfort, becomes something people stand in line for, argue over, fight for. The Praetorian Guard, meant to protect the emperor, has turned into a kind of armed jury. It removes emperors, raises new ones, and then discards them again. For ordinary people, the names at the top change so fast that the office itself starts to feel temporary. Every evening, you push a bolt across the door not just out of habit, but out of genuine uncertainty about tomorrow. You listen to the noises outside and try to understand. Is that distant thunder? Or soldiers on the move? Or something else? It is in this atmosphere of political chaos, military pressure, and everyday fear that underground cults become especially attractive. Not because people suddenly stop believing in Jupiter or Mars, but because the old gods, with their official rituals and marble temples, look distant and slow. Too slow for a world in constant crisis. By the middle of the 3rd century, Rome is not a one-religion empire. It is a huge religious marketplace. Traditional state cults still stand at the center. Sacrifices on public altars, festivals, processions. But around them grows a whole ring of other options. Mystery cults that promise personal salvation, local deities imported from the provinces, Eastern gods who offer intense emotional experiences and a feeling of belonging to a tight group. In this environment, names like Mithras, Magna Mater, the Great Mother, and Attis become familiar, especially in big cities and along military roads. These cults do 3 things that matter in a time of crisis. They promise protection not just for the city, but for the individual. They create small, closed communities, brotherhoods with rules, ranks, and mutual obligations. And they offer dramatic rites that feel like a real break with the past, something that ordinary temple sacrifices no longer provide. When you are exhausted, unsure about tomorrow, and surrounded by rumors of invasion and plague, the offer of a second kind of birth is not just theology. It is a way to feel that your life is not being eaten alive by events you cannot control. One of the most widespread of these cults is dedicated to Mithras. We still do not know everything about his worship. No sacred books have survived. But archaeology gives us a surprisingly clear visual language. If you descend into a Mithraeum, an underground sanctuary of Mithras, you usually find the same elements. A low, narrow space, often carved out below a house or a barracks. Stone benches running along both sides, where people would recline or sit during rituals and meals. At the far end, a relief or painting of a young man in Eastern-style clothing driving a knife into a bull. That scene, Mithras slaying the bull, appears again and again. In Rome, in Ostia, in port districts, in military forts along the Rhine and the Danube, even in London, in a Mithraeum discovered under what is now Walbrook Street. The layout is not accidental. This is not a big open temple like the ones on the Forum. A Mithraeum feels like a cross between a cave and a military common room. Dark, enclosed, with places assigned along the benches and a clear focus on the front image, the god and the bull. Mithras seems to have appealed first and foremost to soldiers and people working close to the army. The cult offered a strict internal hierarchy, stages of initiation, and a sense of belonging to an elite group that shares secrets outsiders do not understand. In a world where legions are moved from crisis to crisis, this kind of portable, underground sanctuary makes sense. If there are soldiers, there is almost always some form of shrine nearby, sometimes under a private house, sometimes under a corner of a larger complex. Next to Mithras in this religious landscape stands another powerful figure, Magna Mater, the Great Mother, often associated with the god Attis. Her cult did not start in Rome. It came from Anatolia and was officially brought into the city centuries earlier, during the Second Punic War. By the time we reach the late Empire, her worship has absorbed and mixed with many other influences. The Great Mother's rites are more openly emotional and more strongly tied to ideas of death and rebirth. The story of Attis, a young man who dies and in some sense returns, becomes a symbol of this cycle. Around her grew a group of striking figures. The Gali, her priests. Ancient authors describe how some of them, in a state of religious ecstasy, voluntarily castrated themselves in honor of the goddess. During festivals, processions with drums and flutes moved through the streets. The Gali, dressed in bright clothing, shaking their hair and crying out, led the crowd. For Romans, who valued self-control and moderation, the sight of these fanatical, emasculated priests was both fascinating and disturbing. It added to the sense that somewhere nearby existed a religion ready to cross the boundaries of body and mind. It is within this religious environment that we encounter one of the most striking and disturbing rites, the Toribolium. Ancient sources describe it in different ways, and scholars still argue about details, but a basic picture can be drawn. A bull is brought as a sacrificial animal. Above a pit or a special compartment, a wooden grate is placed. Beneath this grate stands the person undergoing the rite. When the animal is killed, its blood flows down through openings onto the initiate. One late Christian author, writing with obvious disgust, describes a decorated bull led over a wooden platform pierced with holes. Its throat is cut, and the hot blood falls below, onto the person standing in the darkness of the pit. For some, this sounds like a nightmare. For others, it was the moment when, as they believed, their old life was literally washed away in streams of blood. For some, the Toribolium is connected more with the Great Mother than with Mithras. But in the late Empire, lines blur. Rituals overlap, cults borrow from one another. And for outsiders all underground, blood-centered ceremonies begin to look similar. If someone tells you they bathe in blood under the city, they may not know whether the group is dedicated to Mithras, the Great Mother, or some mixed local version. They only know the main image. A person, a pit, a bull and blood pouring down. From a modern perspective, this sounds extreme. But for people in that world, blood is not just horror. It is a visible symbol of life, the core of sacrifice, and a direct sign that something serious has happened between humans and the divine. Public sacrifices on altars also involve blood, but in a more controlled and distant way. The Toribolium brings this element directly onto one person's body. Some late sources say that those who underwent the rite believed it gave them protection for years, or even for life. In some cases, the person reborn in bull's blood might proudly record this in an inscription, mentioning the date of the Toribolium as a turning point. Whether all descriptions are accurate or somewhat exaggerated, one thing is clear. This type of ritual was meant to be unforgettable, for those inside it and for those who heard about it. One of the most challenging aspects of understanding Mithraic worship is that the cult left almost no written doctrine. What survives are inscriptions, images, architectural layouts, and a few mentions by outsiders, some hostile, some puzzled. Yet, by comparing these sources, historians and archaeologists can reconstruct the outline of what an initiation probably looked like. A Mithraeum was not a place one wandered into by accident. Access was controlled. Members knew each other. Initiates did not speak openly outside. Most reconstructions follow a similar path. An initiate does not simply walk in. He arrives prepared for a symbolic death, the abandonment of his previous identity. This might include a vow of silence, the removal of certain signs of rank, and a period of waiting in darkness or isolation. The psychological purpose is clear: break the connection with ordinary life. In military terms, it is similar to taking off your insignia before joining a special unit. There are strong indications that initiates had their eyes covered or were kept in near-total darkness for a time. In a Mithraeum, darkness is not just an accident of architecture. It is part of the ritual language. Light appears only in controlled, symbolic ways: torches, lamps, the front relief. Darkness disorients, equalizes, forces attention inward and amplifies sound. For an initiate, it prepares the mind for the idea of rebirth. Several Mithraic ranks and symbols involve tools: a knife, a torch, a helmet, a cup. These symbols appear carved on benches, painted on walls, or arranged in ritual sets. Some sources suggest that initiates were handed a cold knife or a sword, or felt the heat of a torch brought close to their face. Not to harm them, but to test their steadiness. For soldiers, this is part of their professional world. For civilians, it adds a layer of intimidation and seriousness. Many cults used ritual beverages to mark transitions. We do not know the exact composition of the Mithraic drink, but ancient authors mention a cup given as part of certain rites. It may have been wine mixed with herbs, a bitter infusion symbolizing hardship, or a liquid tied to purification. This is not a psychedelic ceremony. The drink acts as a marker of the crossing point. Before this, you were outside. After this, you belong inside. Archaeological layouts often show a main room with benches, a smaller platform near the bull-slaying relief, and in some places a pit or graded section. Not all Mithraea had a Torobolium pit. Those belong more firmly to the cult of the Great Mother. But in the late Empire, rituals overlapped, and some sanctuaries show signs that multiple practices happened in the same space or in adjacent chambers. An initiate may have been led toward a symbolic underworld space, moved closer to the bull relief, or into a smaller enclosed room for the climax of the ritual. At the core stands the idea of symbolic death and rebirth. Whether through darkness, loud drumbeats, a sudden blaze of torches, or the pouring of liquid wine, water, or blood, the initiate experiences a moment that marks the death of the old self. For some, this might have been purely symbolic. For others, especially in mixed cults of the late Empire, the Torobolium added a literal physical component. What mattered was not the exact mechanism, but the psychological break. After this moment, the initiate became part of a closed, hierarchical system. The Mithraic cult is unusual in Roman religion because of its structured internal hierarchy. It is one of the few ancient cults with clearly defined ranks. Most reconstructions speak of 7 levels. The raven, the early initiate often called the bridegroom, the soldier, the lion, the Persian, the sunrunner, and finally the father, who leads the Mithraeum. These titles mattered. They mimicked military structure in an empire where the army played a decisive role, so the logic of ranks felt natural to soldiers. They created a path of advancement. An initiate was not just converted. He climbed a ladder, gaining knowledge, status, and responsibility, and they enforced discipline. You did not insult a father. You did not break silence. You did not reveal ritual actions to outsiders. The cult was closed, the space was closed, the hierarchy was closed. Breaking the rules was not tolerated. Some inscriptions hint at punishments or exclusions. Hostile outsiders describe more violent responses. Not all of these stories can be taken at face value, but the consistency of the rumors suggests a reputation for strict internal control. In the Roman world, rumors spread fast, especially when they concerned rituals behind closed doors. Ancient texts and later writers describe stories of this kind, not always with names and dates. You can imagine 3 typical whispers making their way through a crowd. In one, a woman swears on blood that she will reveal her deserter husband's hiding place. Officials record it as an example of an extreme private oath, a hint that underground cult logic has already seeped into everyday life. In another, somewhere in Rome, a rare legal note mentions a killing connected to reckless speech. Commentators link it, perhaps correctly, perhaps not, with underground fraternities where a careless tongue could be treated as betrayal. In a third story, set in Antioch, a man repeats a forbidden phrase outside the meeting place of a brotherhood. The next morning he finds several knives stabbed into his door. No one speaks to him about it. No one has to. Whether such stories happened exactly as told or not, one thing is clear. These groups valued secrecy more than safety. Outsiders saw this and imagined the worst. Some of the darkest rumors concern food and drink. Ancient authors write that certain sects, not always Mithraic, were accused of consuming wine mixed with blood, bread dipped in sacrificial fluid, or meat marked with ritual cuts. There is no archaeological proof of this. Not a single vessel or inscription confirms such practices. But the idea mattered more than the evidence. In the Roman psychological landscape, eating is one of the most intimate human acts. If a group is imagined eating something impure or dangerously sacred, it signals that they are other, dangerous, uncontrolled, and willing to break fundamental boundaries. Fear grows not from facts, but from the possibility. People in the late empire lived in overcrowded cities, with frequent food shortages, epidemics, political instability, and a constant movement of soldiers and civilians. Closed groups meeting underground fit perfectly into the pattern of the dangerous unknown. Most citizens never saw a Mithraeum. They only heard that it was underground, that only men were allowed, that soldiers formed its core, that torches and knives were used, and that some rituals involved blood. For someone already afraid of plague and invasions, that was enough. The mind filled in the rest. By the time these cults reached their peak, another community was also meeting in private houses, catacombs, and small hidden rooms. Early Christians. Although their beliefs were fundamentally different, the outside world often saw the two groups as similar. Both met out of public view. Both held shared meals. Both used symbolic language outsiders did not understand. Both rejected parts of traditional Roman religion. Both spoke about rebirth and salvation. For the average Roman citizen, the distinctions between a Mithraic meeting and a Christian meal were not obvious. You hear, they gather at night. They speak in coded words. They baptize people. They share bread and wine in a secret way. They reject animal sacrifice. It is all too easy to attach those details to either group without realizing which is which. The result is simple. Both communities become targets of similar accusations. Pagan authors sometimes wrote that Christians ate flesh symbolically in their Eucharist, drank blood, misinterpreting the blood of Christ, met in dark places and committed obscure rites, rejected legitimate public cults and therefore endangered the state. Christian writers responded in kind. They accused Mithraists of using blood in purification rituals, the followers of the Great Mother of orgiastic rites, and both groups of demonic imitation of Christian sacraments. One early Christian author even claimed that the Mithraic bread and cup were copies designed by demons to confuse believers. Modern historians do not take these claims literally, but they reveal a critical truth. Everyone accused everyone else of the same things. Blood, secret meals, underground meetings, ritual drama, initiations. In reality, practices differed. But in the public imagination, especially during times of crisis, distinctions blurred. Fear itself had become a common language. Two emperors dramatically changed the landscape. In 249, Decius demanded that every citizen perform a public sacrifice to the Roman gods and the imperial spirit. The edict was not aimed specifically at Christians. It was meant to unify the empire. But Christians refused. They believed sacrifice to the gods contradicted their faith. As a result, some were imprisoned, some executed, many fled or hid. Underground Christian gatherings became even more secretive, and, ironically, more similar in appearance to Mithraic meetings. A few years later, under Valerian, the pressure intensified. He targeted bishops, clergy, and those who refused sacrifice. Those who did not comply faced exile, loss of property, or execution. This period cemented the divide. Christians now saw secret underground meetings as part of their survival. Pagans increasingly associated such gatherings with antisocial behavior and disloyalty. Mystery cults, including Mithraists, became more cautious, more closed, more silent. Secrecy became a survival strategy for some, and a cause for suspicion in the eyes of others. By the end of the 4th century, everything changes again. Theodosius I issues a series of laws banning public sacrifices, forbidding pagan rituals, defunding temples, and declaring Christianity the official religion of the empire. Temples close. Holy fires go out. Priesthoods dissolve. Mithraic shrines, often hidden and modest, become even easier to abandon. Mithraism, with its military base and strict internal ranks, does not survive this transition. Christianity grows stronger, backed by imperial support. By 410, when the Visigoths sack Rome, most Mithraea are already dark, dusty rooms. By the 500s, many are filled with rubble. Some serve as storage spaces. Others become foundations for Christian buildings. The era of underground bull rituals is over. At this point, it becomes crucial to separate fear from fact. Modern archaeology gives a surprisingly clear picture. and also shows where ancient anxieties exaggerated or misunderstood reality. Across the empire, more than 400 Mithraea have been discovered. Most have benches, bull-slaying reliefs, lamps, altars, and symbols of ranks, repeating the same pattern from Britain to Syria. Nowhere, however, do we find physical evidence of human sacrifice. No Mithraeum contains human remains clearly linked to ritual killing, no altars shaped for human victims, no tools designed for such acts. The cult was harsh and demanding, but not murderous. True Torobolium structures, the pits and channels for blood, are rare and belong primarily to the cult of the Great Mother, not Mithras. They are found mostly in Rome, Ostia, Lugdunum, and a few sites in Asia Minor. In the 4th century, some rituals mixed and sanctuaries stood side by side, which certainly confused observers. But they were not one single, universal bloodbath cult. Animal bones and sacrificial remains, cattle, sheep, birds, appear in many Mithraea. They match ritual meals, not mass slaughter. Graffiti, symbols, and inscriptions mention ranks, dedications, prayers, and offerings for protection or for victory. None explicitly speaks of a bloody baptism. Christian sources, written from the outside and often in the heat of polemic, likely misunderstood, amplified, or reimagined what happened in those rooms. So what really happened in those underground spaces? We know that Mithraic groups met in small, enclosed shrines. They used ranks and discipline. They conducted initiations with darkness, symbolic tools, and ritual drama. They shared meals. Some sanctuaries may have hosted Torobolium-type ceremonies nearby, or shared space with the Great Mother's cult. Animal sacrifices took place, as in almost every Roman religious context. We also know what was exaggerated. Bathing in blood was not a universal practice. Initiates were not murdered as part of regular rites. Cannibalism never took place. The cult was not a secret death squad. Archaeology simply does not support those fantasies. And we understand what ancient people believed. There were dark rooms. There were torches. There were drums. There were disciplined men with knives. There was real blood from animal sacrifices. Put that together in a city already trembling from plague and invasion, and it is easy to see how terrifying the cult seemed to outsiders. Their fear filled every gap in their knowledge. Long after the cult itself disappeared, the idea of underground blood rituals survived. It endures because it taps into something deeper than Roman politics or religious disputes. It speaks to universal anxieties. Fear of hidden groups, fear of secrecy, fear of losing control, fear of rituals we cannot understand. Even today, the image is powerful. A dim room, a bull, a knife, a grate overhead. Somewhere between history and myth lies a truth. People in crisis seek meaning. Some go to temples. Some go to churches. Some go underground. And sometimes the fear of what happens in the dark becomes more real than the dark itself. Rome is a city where nothing ever fully disappears. Above ground, you see basilicas, bright, open, filled with hymns. Below ground, archaeologists walk through corridors carved centuries before Christianity was legal. The air is cold. The stones are rough. The silence is so heavy it feels like a presence. You clap your hands and the echo returns slowly, almost reluctantly. You look at the walls and imagine the people who reclined on these benches. Soldiers far from home, freedmen searching for belonging, merchants trying to find protection, men living through war and plague. They sought order. They sought rebirth. They sought a community stronger than fear. The rituals ended. The altars went cold. But one thing never left: the memory of a world where people believed that blood could change fate. In Rome, memories hide everywhere. In the stones, in the tunnels, in the air below the streets. Somewhere, if you stand very still in an old Mithraeum, you might swear you feel the faint vibration of a drum. History says the cult is gone. But the city remembers.